Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Codependent Dummy podcast. It's your hostess, mostess, Marissa, and today we are joined by Julianne Guinasso. She is a licensed therapist in California. Aside from practicing therapy, she supports mental health professionals build trust with their employees through leadership consultation and employee management strategies. Julianne, outside of the therapy and consultation room, enjoys being in nature, listening to music, dancing, advocacy practices, and reading. Julianne, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. All right, so the first two questions, I've renamed my typical two.
Okay.
I ask everyone these two. So first question of the typical two. Julianne, how do you define codependency?
I would define codependency in its most simple form as saying that my sense of safety and my sense of self lives outside of me. So as if my safety lives in another. So if the other is good and happy, then I'm safe. So essentially, in order to feel safe, I might, erase parts of myself. So then the relationship becomes a place where I really get my source of sense of worth. And again, that safety feeling.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a baby nephew. He's 5 months old. While you were talking, I pictured him, right? Because as infants,
mm-hmm.
I don't even know. Yeah, he doesn't he can't conceive. He's not aware of his separateness. And so, yeah, how do you sense our dependency as children turns into codependency, where, we never lose that sense of being attached to someone?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a lot of shame come from those who identify with feeling codependent.
Right.
And so I feel like the I guess switch or paradigm of that is it's such a healthy way to shift and operate when you know that the way for me to feel safe in my body is to show up in this way. If I show up in this specific way in this environment, I'm rewarded, I feel good. And so I think that thinking of your nephew, if that never shifts, if those developmental stages aren't maybe fully allowed, and I find that I have to continue to really show up in these different ways, and maybe even different environments, even outside of the home, I might find that I really do feel safest when I can really define myself through those I'm in contact with.
Yeah.
And so magic markers. Did you use magic markers back in the day? Yeah, they were the best. And I think my favorite thing to do with magic markers was actually to take that invisible magic marker and kind of write a secret message so it would be clear. And then, you give your friends like the different other markers, and then maybe they start to color it in and a message starts to appear. I feel like that was the best part of the magic markers. And I kind of feel like with someone who's codependent, if you were to ask them to draw themselves, you almost would hand them that invisible marker first. And so they would almost outline their body and themselves as that. And then you would almost imagine that they would hand each of those colored markers to the different people they have contact or connection with. And it's almost like they're giving them that marker to start to color them in. And it's like, as they keep having contact with these different people, these different parts of them. So maybe their, arm is blue and their foot is red. And it just kind of starts to really morph in the way they define themselves. Because I find when you talk with someone who's codependent, sometimes their needs, they're not even sure really what those are. Like, what are my needs? What are my wants? I'm so used to not even knowing how to tune inward to find those. But I'm so excellent at knowing how to tune outwards and understand kind of like what my environment needs.
Yeah, I love that. Yes. And I'm curious, do you have experiences of codependency from your own life to share with us?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like codependency has been like a theme throughout, both in personal and professional. I think it's kind of a continuum, right? I think there's like the codependency and then interdependence, hyper independence. And so I think that at any given point, you can kind of find yourself maybe on that scale. And so I think on moments where I lean into like the codependency, I think for me, it's in personal life, it shows up as simple things, even like, what do you want to do? Or what do you want to eat? I don't know. I'm not sure, whatever you would like to do. That sounds super simple. And then on a bigger macro level, when you're consistently always giving over to the people around you, that can start to kind of compound. So I think for me, what would happen in personal life is my resentment meter would start to kind of go off. And that would kind of be a cue that I was perhaps giving so little of myself and showing up in a way where it was always really about the other person and kind of like what would appease them. And so that would make me feel safe in the relationship. And then I think in professional realms, what that can look like is me overworking myself to an extent where I've even had like physical things. Usually my body is usually the last thing that says like, nope, it's not gonna continue. It can't keep happening this way. So it's usually my body that gets my attention, and not maybe the other behaviors that I'm doing where maybe I'm overcommitting, or I'm scheduling myself in a way that's not really set up for my own needs or wants again, right? Because it's like, oh, I need to show up in this way that's expected of me. So I'm going to push through all the cues that tell me I need to like rest or stop. And so I think my body has always been the one that's really kind of made that final call and kind of helped me tap into where kind of my parameters are with that.
Yes. I'm so curious about this resentment meter.
Yeah.
What is that? And when have you been off the charts?
Well, I think it's a beautiful barometer. And I think that for me, when that typically is going off, it's, let me think of a specific story or example. I can think of a time actually traveling with a friend and being so aware that I kept saying yes to the things my friend really wanted to do. And so at first it felt really natural for me to just say like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. That sounds nice. That sounds fun. And then slowly throughout the day or the next day, realizing that I was agreeing to so many things that didn't necessarily like serve me. Like maybe I needed more breaks in my day, or maybe I needed to have a break from processing or being a container for them. And so realizing that not only was it hard for me to notice my cues, when I noticed them, it was then hard to actually give voice to them. And so at some point, especially in travel, I feel like, right? It's always great to learn people through travel. You kind of see what like how really where they began and end. At some point, I
Yes.
just like had a complete kind of like shutdown. So for me, I really kind of connect even codependency to kind of our nervous system and kind of that process. So for me, it ended
Mm,
up being kind of going from, I guess they use that term fawning that I've heard before, to almost like a freeze response where I just completely shut down. And
right.
so that was like an indication that I had kind of gone over my limits in so many ways. And then once I became aware of them, it was really hard for me to actually verbalize it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read literature on, for so everybody knows, this is the Codependent podcast we're learning here. So the adaptive responses to fear, to a threat are fight. So we fight back, flight, we run, freeze, we play dead, and now
Mm-hmm.
fawn, which is,
Yes.
you know, damsel fainting or
It's
just, yeah,
like
just
people pleasing. Yeah.
mm,
I believe it's Pete Walker that I think talks about it or has kind of brought it into the literature the most. And so he kind of describes it as a people pleasing to the extent of the only way that I can show up safe in this space is if I'm able to appease. So if
mm,
I do fight, that person I'm connected with is going to get maybe angrier. If I do flee, I might get punished for fleeing. And if I freeze, I might get in trouble for not being responsive or avoidant. So if I show up in this way, then I can again like maybe feel safe
and then collapse.
and then collapse. Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I don't know, I think I have shared about this recently on the podcast, but I remember not not it wasn't my dad's fault, but I think I had been saying yes to him a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And yeah, just arguably going above and beyond for certain requests that he had
Mm-hmm.
this season of time. And we were in the kitchen. He said one thing to me,
Mm.
and just
Uh-huh.
I
It was
blew
it.
up.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And my poor dad, I word vomited vile, hateful things towards him because he said one
Uh-huh.
thing. But
Uh-huh.
being codependent, that resentment just was building. And
And,
then,
and you don't really notice it, right? Like you're not really getting like the cues. It's not like you're denying the cues the entire time. I think for me, once I start to get them, I want to pretend I didn't notice them at first, right? Because this means now I have to really like use my voice and say no, and then that feels can feel scary. But I
mhm,
do think that it's interesting that those cues don't regularly kind of even call our attention, really.
right,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it was hard to notice them,
Mm-hmm.
A, and then B, it's hard to even acknowledge them.
Mm-hmm.
It's
And I
like
think,
that. Go ahead.
oh no, I'm sorry. I think, being an introvert for me personally, once it starts to be there and I get even past the point of not verbalizing, I'm just going to kind of go into like that shutdown mode. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then too, I do everyone's going to keep hearing this because all of our guests have been saying it recently. So apparently we're supposed to be paying
Mm-hmm.
attention. The your body, it's showing up
Mm-hmm.
in your body.
Mm-hmm.
Julianne, the I don't know how many guests of late have mentioned, and maybe they were saying it a year ago and I wasn't paying attention,
Mm,
but now that has been the running theme of the podcast lately
that
is
is so interesting.
paying attention to our body. How's it
Mm,
showing up in our bodies? Acknowledging our bodies. Yeah,
mhm,
what are
mhm,
these cues telling us
mhm.
about our codependent relationships?
Yeah, I think for me, uh, because it's easy for me to ignore those body cues, it would show up in even bigger ailments, like physically, where I'm actually trying to figure out why I have hives, like, why do I have hives? I don't understand. There's no reason why I should have this, and being told like, oh, this is a stress response, or, just having different issues with like digestion or fatigue, right? So all these like major things that kind of like put you in a position where you have to kind of really figure out like what's happening and what are all the signals I've been like totally avoiding and just like going full stream ahead, right? And just not really paying attention. And so I feel like it took several of those instances, several, for me to, for me to finally think like, oh, how could I actually pay attention first to like the daily body cues, even if it's as simple as like, you need more water. How could I start there and just really tap into that? And would that allow me to prevent like these major physical like crises, essentially? Yeah.
Yes.
I love the theme. Things always come in themes, right?
Yeah. Okay, we get the memo, universe. Well, or kind of. Do we? Do we get the memo?
Well, maybe.
Yeah. Apparently we have to keep getting it.
Yeah.
And shifting towards your specialty, working with therapists. We are a field of healers, givers, listeners, compassionate professionals.
Yep.
How have you observed codependent behaviors in the mental health therapists you've worked with?
So what's interesting is, I specifically work with therapists who are now finding themselves in leadership positions.
Yes.
So it's this really interesting dichotomy because the codependency has not gone anywhere. It's still alive and well, yet they're needing now to actually ask people things. They're needing now to actually like be clear with boundaries. And so it kind of, I think, manifests in several different ways. I think sometimes what this might look like is perhaps changing a policy and procedure because the employees are kind of not into it. And so the therapist might say like, okay, well, with this need to maybe appease or feel like if I'm not safe or I'm not doing a good job unless I'm liked or unless I feel that connection piece. So I think it can show up there. I think it can show up in, allowing employees to kind of do what they want in some ways. I think it sometimes can be taking on, excuse me, their workload. So trying to kind of think like, okay, well, to be more of support, let me actually help them with their tasks. And so it's like at some point you're consistently putting the needs of your employees over your own well-being, and even more so over the business. And so when I think that pattern starts to show up kind of repetitively, I think that's when leaders kind of really want that support in how do I still stay aligned with my values? Because I think for those that do connect with being codependent, there are some values though that can be beautifully aligned with codependency, right? Like I feel like for those that might be codependent, people might really associate with being kind or being humble or being of service. I think some of those things can kind of like go together. And so if I see myself in this way, how do I actually learn to be assertive, and how do I actually learn to be clear with those parameters with my employees in a way where I can still feel safe as leader and not have to consistently give up myself, because again, I will wind up in that same boat.
I have a question that is verbatim what you just said. I want to get to.
Okay.
Yes. Before that, just to review, so potentially for the listeners, so Julianne works with, if you see a therapist who works at an office with other therapists, or if you work with a baby therapist, someone who's getting licensed, they are supervised, overseen, managed by leader therapists.
Yeah, exactly.
And like you said, Julianne, potentially these mental health therapists, right, that are running these groups, that are supervising these associates, they may, despite their leadership role, have difficulty with policies. They may allow employees to do what they want, take on their workload, and overall, prioritize the needs of others over their own and over the business.
So it might be hard to hold employees accountable. You might even be minimizing the employees' mistakes, right? Because you want them to like not worry about it, or you want to avoid that kind of conflict that might come with that.
Right. Conflict avoidance at all costs, even the business.
Yes, even at the expense of, not only your well-being, but the business.
I'm curious, what are some consequences you've witnessed or heard about with therapist leaders struggling with codependency?
I think that resentment meter comes out again. And I would also say burnout and compassion fatigue. I think inevitably they're kind of almost weaving in and out of those spaces at any given time. If they don't have practices in place that like help support them, I think in being in touch with, I can be aligned with my values and still hold boundaries with my employees. So I can be both and still be safe. And so I think when you're not used to doing that in your personal life, and now all of a sudden you're put in this position where you do have authority and you are supposed to be a leader, it does really take a second. And I don't think you can really know that that's going to be safe until you do. And I think that's the scariest part, is that most people will need to get to a place where the consequences feel so big that they actually have to start doing more. But that takes a lot of courage and a lot of like strength to be willing to kind of like break and shift those patterns that can be so unconscious.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And I'm curious, I mean, I know you work specifically with and support therapists. Any thoughts on how you've witnessed therapists be codependent beyond their staff with their patients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what that can look like is boundaries in a different way. So it might be how much you are taking the session with you home, essentially, right? So I feel like that's normal for any therapist, right? We can't just like, we don't have a turn off button where we can just nicely turn it off and just pretend that we didn't take on and kind of absorb what we did. I find with people who are codependent, they might emotionally take on that load and forget to also give some of that responsibility to their patient. So I'm going to be here with you versus I'm going to take this on with you.
Right.
And so I think that can often happen when the provider is with their patient. It could also look like unintentionally extending sessions. So you're not actually giving yourself a second to actually like go to the bathroom or get water, or even shake off the last session before you go into the next. So I think boundaries kind of come up here too as well. I would say those are the main things that I probably see. And then maybe not, again, reinforcing your own policies and procedures, like you as a therapist. So if I have a cancellation policy, maybe I'm not actually upholding it because conflict again, right? I have to like assert this boundary and I really want to maintain this safety with this client. So how do I navigate this? Again, how do I still feel aligned with my values and yet feel like I can be assertive and actually share my voice?
Mm-hmm. Which is very foreign to a codependent.
So foreign. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm curious. So, yeah, potentially therapists taking on as opposed to, I forget the language you had. So I take it on as opposed to take on the load.
Let's see if I may say it differently this time too.
That's so good.
No, thank you. Rather than, I guess, sitting with you in it, I'm taking it on with you.
There we go.
Yeah.
So that, and then you gave these amazing examples. So extending a session as not to get water, move our bodies, go to the bathroom, basic needs.
Basic needs.
I will neglect my basic needs. And then yes, the policies, the cancellation policies, the no-show policies.
Yep. Exactly.
Yes. And tying those two together, I'm curious if you have experienced a codependent therapist in leadership overseeing and unintentionally creating an environment of therapists working for him or her, all codependent with each other and their patients.
Yeah. Yes, I definitely have. What's interesting about that is it just makes me think of like, what are all the unsaid things, right? I feel like the leader has a lot of unsaid things. I think the employee has a lot of unsaid things. I'm not sure about the client. Maybe that, I don't know that helps the client necessarily meet their goals, but I feel like the client might feel like they actually benefit a lot from that because I feel like then both are overgiving. But at some point that always has to come to an end, right? Because we aren't robots. We don't have this infinite amount of energy. We do have to actually rest and restore and eat and like have water. So there always comes a point where that burnout or that resentment or that ability or that space where we can't keep operating. And so I think that's inevitably what happens is the codependent leader might unintentionally teach the therapists to also not prioritize self in a way where it doesn't become sustainable, essentially.
That was my job in community mental health.
Yes.
We're just all little codependent therapists, baby therapists.
Yep.
Within a environment at the agency, but county, community mental health as a whole.
Yeah. That's where I say I like grew up professionally. Yeah. That was like the first decade of my career. Yeah. And it's hard when it is a norm and rewarded, right? So if someone consistently shows that they're going to prioritize the job and their work over themselves, that will often be like rewarded and praised, which can be really confusing. And perhaps the employee who's like, wait a minute, I don't think this is like an appropriate ask, might be labeled as not cut out for this work or not cut out for this job, right? So I feel like, unfortunately, that's such a common thing that actually, this is actually what spurred my interest actually in becoming part of leadership, because I saw so many colleagues think it was them that was the problem. And even consider maybe this isn't the field for me. Maybe I'm not cut out. Maybe I should believe what I'm being told. And maybe this isn't the work I should be doing. And so it's actually really the core of actually kind of what sparked me in really wanting to step into leadership and actually say we can actually create really healthy workplaces no matter where. And when we do, when our employees are in health, they can treat in health. So we know that the clinical outcomes are going to be higher. And to really be able to like support and share that and help people. So we're not falling into these traps where like we almost like sell our soul, I want to say, right? Like I will be completely depleted as a person and just keep doing the work. But what does that really look like? And what is really that cost for really everyone involved, including the client? Because we know that there's no way for clients to get the care they need when they're always with a provider who has nothing to give.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've definitely had to come to, aware of how the environment was leading or contributing to my behaviors. Also, what in my past made that familiar and normal and welcomed and sustainable until it wasn't. And also, just coming to terms with the unknowing hurt and damage or inaction that I caused some of my patients just because, I was thirsty. I was hungry. I had to go to the bathroom, but I wasn't actually doing any of those things.
Right.
And I was fawning and unknowingly being unhelpful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. I was just going to say it's hard. It's hard to realize you're in that cycle. Like you said, when personally you're kind of set up to think like, oh yeah, this is like what I've been waiting for to do. I really, have a service. I really do care to work with this population. I really, come from the space of wanting to support and feeling like it is normal to neglect all my needs until you really just can't anymore.
Yeah. Can you describe for us in your own words what compassion fatigue is?
Absolutely. I would describe compassion fatigue as finding yourself no longer being able to hold space or care for the people that you used to and technically do still very much care about. So when you notice that you're no longer able to meet people in empathy, and really in kindness, I guess, even when the person across from you is actually suffering, when you start to notice that is how I would define compassion fatigue, separate than burnout, right? It's definitely they're cousins, I feel like, but like they're like a little bit different. And what I think can be so hard for a provider to land in compassion fatigue is it's confusing to all of a sudden have gone from someone who's consistently so caring and so nurturing and has a heart of service to realizing how apathetic you are to the suffering that's across from you. It's a very strange space to be, and kind of confusing, I think, for the provider to have landed in that space. And again, I think these are all cues, but when you get to that point, you're like at the end of the road where like you've passed all the cues and you're fully in this space where you're really being, I guess, invited to kind of step away, not like permanently or even necessarily for like a month or anything, but to really like take a step back, I suppose, and kind of figure out how do I actually first start with giving myself compassion. And I feel like now even the word compassion can be loaded. So sometimes I like to say the word kindness. And how can I first start there? And how can during my day I start to ask myself, what's the kindest thing I can do for myself right now? And when I am able to actually meet those needs, do I find that all of a sudden my empathy starts to come back for the person across from me, and I can actually be present with them in their pain versus completely numb.
What is the kindest thing I can do for myself?
And right now, because sometimes I think we unintentionally put it on our to-do list for like later. I think, yeah, it can easily feel like another thing to do. But I think sometimes when we say like, what right now do I need? I think that's when we can identify if it's, I don't know, laying on the floor for a second and the need of having no like sensory input. Maybe it's like putting on your favorite playlist. So this is definitely one of my favorites. And listening to like that song. Maybe it's a song that like gives you more energy and like life, or maybe it's a song that's like really soothing and like supports you to kind of center into yourself. So whatever that looks like for other, people, everyone's different. Could be going into the sunshine for a second, taking a walk, noticing the birds. I feel like all of that can look different, but it's a beautiful way to really anchor into yourself. And I think as a codependent, if we are unintentionally always scanning externally and always looking externally, it's these little cues that can just like help us and invite us to go back inwards.
I'm curious, what's the kindest thing you can do for yourself right now?
Well, I suppose I would say after you and I are done having this lovely conversation, I think for me, it'll probably be doing that playlist.
Nice.
It'll probably be putting on a playlist that allows me to just kind of like move my body. And I think that would be it. And I think in this moment, it would be my water.
Yes.
Yeah.
Water, Julianne.
It would be drinking the water if we're going to be like really finite about this moment.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stretch my neck.
That's a good one too.
I don't know if the mic picked it up, but I just popped some neck muscles.
I heard a little bit of it.
Yeah, take a breath.
Yeah, breath is a good one too, right? I mean, I'm just dabbling into the world of like breath and being aware of your breath. I'm aware of how much I hold or restrict my breath. Sometimes I'm aware of it. I'm mostly not aware of it, but I'm trying to get curious. And so there have been times when I ask myself, what's the kindest thing you can do? And it's like, oh yeah, I should like breathe. Like I should allow myself to actually take in a complete inhale, and not just kind of continue like a more shallow breath because of maybe being on high alert or being really connected or attached to what's happening in my environment.
Right. I love it. Okay. So my question, which you already started to answer, how can we take the best parts of codependency and apply them to leadership?
This is such a lovely question. I love that. I think that codependency and having a heart of service do go together, right? I suppose talking about those values I talked about earlier, and knowing that when you do talk to people who identify with being codependent, they're going to list a lot of those kind of service-oriented values. So kindness, compassion, service. I know I'm missing so many, right? There's endless values, luckily, that we can pull from and we can connect to. But I think when you take those parts of codependency and you're actually putting your employees as the humans they are versus a productivity machine, right? I do think that actually can be a really beautiful thing. And so I think in that way, your leadership can really be enhanced. So what you're learning, so I guess I see it, the two spectrums again, right? So if you're in a codependent place, you're learning then to step more into your voice, into your boundaries, into being okay with having the hard conversations, rather than necessarily needing to remind yourself that like your employees are human, and they need breaks, and they need to be asked, how are you that you just got off that really intense phone call or that really intense assessment or whatever that those conversations look like. So I think that when employees work with leaders who are codependent, I think they can feel very nurtured and seen. And I think that can be a lovely experience when that leader is in check, or at least working and has awareness about their codependency.
Mm-hmm. This is year 2 of the podcast. And as you're speaking about values, I set an intention. I think it was an episode that aired at the end of January. And I said to everybody, this year, the overarching theme is tenderness. And I was like, does everybody know what tenderness means? I looked it up. And it's gentleness, softness, and a sensitivity to pain.
Ooh.
I was like, you guys, I'm going to be sensitive to your pain. And you can be sensitive to your own pain. Yeah. And so here I am.
I love that.
Codependent, starting the podcast, talking about it. And yet, thanks to, like you said, the need for and hope for safety, having our sense of self outside of ourselves, that can hopefully turn into promoting our own and others' safety, and being conscious of balancing our needs with the needs of others, compromise, all that stuff. And yeah, tenderness is a appropriate goal given the context of this show.
I love that word, and I love allowing ourselves to even embrace that. I think you have to give space and pause to allow tenderness to be there. I think we can find so many substitutes to not allow ourselves to feel the tenderness, right? And to actually hold space for that. So I love that. And I love even actually hearing the breakdown of the definition for even holding space for pain.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I was like, thank you, Google. It aligns. Okay. So with the leadership consultation, employee management strategies, any tool you can share with us that myself or the listeners can integrate this week?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the workplace, so perhaps this is a conversation you need to have with like your boss or a stakeholder, or if you are a leader and it's with your employee. I think it's giving yourself permission to ask yourself, when I show up to do my work, which part of my work is fulfilling the expectations or what I've agreed to do, and which part of my work am I doing so I can feel secure and safe. And I think in the beginning that might be really muddled, but I think as you continue to ask yourself that question, you can start to see where perhaps that overcommitment starts to seep in. And I think that would be really powerful for anyone to start to be aware, and then to actually give themselves permission to do radically different, not like all the time, because that's not possible, but like if they know that they always say yes to their boss, even when it's not possible, what would that look like if for one time you gave yourself permission to actually say, actually, I realize I have a lot on my plate and I can't commit to that. Thank you for thinking of me. And so what would that look like? So that would be my my suggestion or even invitation for those listening.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious if we can try to apply it to Marissa circa 2016 when I was in the trenches of that codependent job, just for an example.
Totally. Let's do it.
Okay. So Marissa 2016, when I show up to do my work, which part fulfills expectations? First thing that comes to mind is I was paid for an 8-hour workday.
But you were working more.
Julianne. I slept. I dreamt about that job. It pervaded all areas of my life. So which part fulfills the expectations is working from 8 to 5, 9 to 6, 10 to 7, depending on when I saw patients. And then what ideas come to mind? You were in community mental health as well, doing something to feel safe and secure.
So the first thing when you said that came to my mind, I was like, ooh, how many people have a caseload that when they look at their treatment plans and overlaid it with their schedules, and in community mental health, we have a lot of travel time often. And so if you were to actually overlay your caseload and the expectations onto your schedule, does that actually allow for everything billable and non-billable? And I realize I'm using like jargon. So like for those listening,
stay with us, everybody.
Right?
Stay with us.
There's so many things that come that we would classify as like quotes, not billable, but are parts of the job that are required from different stakeholders, right? And so really mapping out what that looks like, which I realize would take more time, but giving yourself that opportunity to really map that out so you can actually go to your boss and say, I'm aware of what I'm being asked to do. And I'm seeing that this actually goes over my expectation of 40 hours a week. What can we do about this? I realize that for a lot of people, they might say that's not a safe conversation for me to have, which is like heartbreaking. And again, like the reason why I care so deeply about the work I'm doing, because I want there to be a moment where anyone can actually feel safe doing that, and for their boss to be like, wow, I didn't even realize that. Thank you actually for bringing that to my attention. We don't want that for you because we want you for this to be sustainable. We love your work. We appreciate what you're doing. I think for some people that happens. And I think for a lot of people it doesn't. But I think logistically, that would be kind of what I would suggest someone do, is like, what data, I suppose, do you need more than just story and hearsay that you can like provide that really shows, here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'm needing. How can we try to fuse those closer together?
Yeah. So to recap, which part fulfills expectations? My 8-hour workday, my 40-hour work week. That is what I am paid to do. And then what can I do to feel safe and secure to honor that that expected 40-hour work week by looking at all the expectations for all the clients. So non-therapists, looking at all the expectations of your job description, quantifying how many hours you do dedicate to that each week, seeing that it's closer to 50, 60, 70, 80 hours. And for your ultimate sense of safety and security, Julianne is encouraging you to start a conversation with your employer.
Yeah. And I think First of all, your boss isn't your source, right? So of course, like all of us need our job. So that's important. And we don't want to put that at risk. And our boss isn't our source. And so when we attach our boss as our source or our sense of worth, then I think that's when we start to compromise those things. So yeah, when we can say, this is hard for me to say, or this is hard for me to bring up to you, or I feel a little nervous doing this, but I spent some time and I'm aware that these tasks take this amount of time. So maybe you can even start there and ask, is this the amount of time you would expect this to be? Because maybe I'm being a perfectionist and I'm maybe spending too much time on these specific things. And you're going to tell me that, you know what, you actually don't need to prioritize that. So I think it's clarifying that. And then if they're like, yeah, that makes sense that it takes you that amount of time. And then I think you can kind of take it a step further and saying, can I share with you what this looks like then for my entire week? And then slowly going in a way where it feels collaborative. So your boss doesn't feel like you're being antagonistic, I suppose, or questioning, like you're really truly just trying to be curious and understand what this would look like. And then it hopefully can be a conversation where they're able to kind of notice that, like, you're right, what I'm asking of you is actually not realistic at all. And so how can we shift things? How can I take maybe some unnecessary meetings off your week? How can I perhaps delegate some of these tasks to someone else? Or how can I add someone else onto this project so it's not just you holding this? And I think the more we can learn and to start to have those conversations, we can find that wherever we are can be more sustainable and long-term. And then I think for those of you that don't get the response you're looking for after trying a couple of times, I think that's a really clear message too.
It is. So I've had a guest on, I forget her last name, Karen. She was the divorce coach, everyone. And she talked about how everything is an opportunity.
Totally. I love that perspective.
And so you can go and hopefully collaborate, compromise, have a curious conversation. And also, if you're met with a response that is opposite of promoting your safety and security, that's helpful data. That's helpful information. It's an opportunity to look for safety and security elsewhere.
Totally.
Potentially.
Yeah. Data, story, and metrics for sure.
Yeah. All right. I feel like well, just to review, Julianne is encouraging us, what is the kindest thing we can do right now? And pay attention to your daily body cues. And then these last steps about a curious conversation at work if needed. All right. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, thank you for having me. I love these types of conversations. Oh, me too. If a therapist is resonating, or even a potential patient, where can people hear more about you? Yeah, so you can find me at levelupleaders.org. And or even Instagram account, which is at levelupleaders. Okay, we will put links to both of those in the show notes. And everybody, if you resonated, please share this with a beloved friend, therapist, codependent of yours. We would appreciate it. And thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Hey, girl. It's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster. I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.